Hello everyone and welcome back to Ways of the World Chapter 4, Culture and Religion in Eurasia and North Africa. And we're going to continue our study with the cultural traditions of classical India. Okay, South Asian religion from ritual sacrifice to philosophical speculation. Widely recognized sacred texts provided some common ground within the diversity of Indian culture and religion. The Vedas consisted of poems, hymns, prayers, and rituals. It was compiled by Brahmins, those are priests, and transmitted orally. But they weren't written down in Sanskrit until 600 BCE. But it does provide a glimpse of Indian civilization, roughly 1500 to 600 BCE. And we know there were competing chiefdoms or kingdoms, a clearly defined patriarchal society, but less restrictive than later periods, especially to upper-class women. And the role of Brahmins was important in the practicing of elaborate ritual sacrifice. It gave them power and wealth. The Upanishads were mystical philosophical works that developed in response to dissatisfaction with the Brahmins. It was composed between 800 and 400 BCE. And this is a probe in the inner meaning of these Vedic rituals, or introspection. And the central idea was that Brahman, the world soul, was the ultimate reality. And Atman, the individual human soul, was part of Brahman. And the ultimate goal, moksha, was the union of Atman with Brahman. And achieving union involved many lifetimes. And this is where the idea of samsara, or reincarnation, or rebirth, comes from, is that's central to the process of moksha. And karma is what governed samsara. Hinduism was legitimated and expressed India's gender system. Women increasingly were forbidden to learn the Vedas and participate in public rituals, these religious rituals. Laws of Manu defined women as beholden to men in every phase of life. Even sexual pleasure, however, was a legitimate goal for men and women as detailed in the Kama Sutra. Now, many Hindu deities were female, and there were multiple paths to fulfillment in Hindu religious thought. And the Brahmin priests, and especially wandering ascetics, spread these ideas. Okay, here we have an image of Hindu ascetics. Hinduism called for men in the final stage of life to leave ordinary ways of living and withdraw into the forest to seek spiritual liberation, or moksha. Here, in an illustration from an early 13th century Indian manuscript, a holy man explores a text with 3 disciples in a scheduled rural setting. Alright, the Buddhist challenge. This develops side by side with philosophical Hinduism. Siddhartha Gautama, circa 566 to 466 BCE, went on a spiritual journey that led him to quote-unquote enlightenment or insight at age 29. And his followers saw him as the Buddha, the man who had awakened. Now, central to Buddhist teaching was that life is suffering, and sorrow's cause is craving for individual fulfillment and not attachment to self. So the quote-unquote cure came with modest and moral choices and meditation. And the goal is achievement of enlightenment, or nirvana, extinguishing of individual identity. Now, large elements of Hinduism are present in Buddhist teaching. Life as an illusion, the ideas of karma and rebirth, overcoming the demands of the ego, the practice of meditation, and hope for release from the cycle of rebirth. But much of Buddhism challenged Hinduism. There's a rejection of Brahmins' religious authority and the lack of interest in abstract speculation. And there became a need for individuals to take responsibility for their own spiritual development. And that also challenged the inequalities of the caste system. While at first opposed, Buddha ultimately allowed separate female orders of nuns. Rules clearly subordinated nuns to men, and the Buddha viewed women as an obstacle to male enlightenment. And nuns found relative independence. This appealed especially to the lower castes and women in India. Teaching was done in their local languages, not classical Sanskrit, and it linked to local traditions with the establishment of monasteries and stupas, or shrines, with relics of the Buddha. And it also received state support from the Emperor Ashoka, who ruled 268 to 232 BCE. But we do see a split within Buddhism. Early Buddhism, Theravada, the teaching of the elders, was rigorous, time-consuming, but less accessible to the masses. By early in the Common Era, there's the development of Mahayana, or the Great Vehicle, which is much more spiritually accessible to those beyond monks and nuns. Alright, dating from the late 8th century in Korea. This monumental, beautifully proportioned sculpture portrays the Buddha at the moment of his enlightenment, symbolized by his right hand touching the earth. Seated on a lotus pedestal, this image of the Buddha also shows the Ushnisha, the round oval at the top of his head, which represents his spiritual attainment, and the dot in the center of his forehead, indicating wisdom. Now, this sculpture is located in the Siakoram grotto, or cave, where it is surrounded by numerous supernatural figures and by 2 Indian gods. It is widely considered a masterpiece of Buddhist art and is a Korean national treasure. And Hinduism as a religion of duty and devotion. Buddhism was gradually reincorporated into Hinduism in India. Mahayana Buddhism in particular spread elsewhere in Asia. In the first millennium CE, we see the development of a more popular Hinduism. It's expressed in epic poems, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. There's action in the world and performance of caste duties that provide a path to liberation, as put forth in the text of the Bhagavad Gita, 300 CE. And the Bhakti, or the worship of specific deities, was a movement that began in South India. And that concludes our study of cultural traditions of classical India. I'll see you guys next time. I apologize for any mispronunciation of any of the terms.